Good afternoon, everybody. Goedemiddag allemaal. Welkom bij deze lezing van OZ. Ik zal zo meteen weer overschakelen naar het Engels, aangezien onze gastspreker Engelstalig is. So I just said to Tim that I will do this in English because of you being a native English speaker. Today what we will do, we will have a presentation by Tim Stonor. I will introduce him a little bit more just now. And he will have a presentation of about 20 minutes. And after that, we will have the possibility to ask questions. We will follow the questions through the chat or through the question interface that we have on this site. And then we will have a short discussion afterwards to change ideas on the presentation of Tim. The title of the presentation of Tim is Together, Apart, Mobility, Interaction, and Spatial Design Post-COVID. Well, short introduction to Tim. I have met Tim more than a year ago, where he was our keynote speaker in a collaboration with the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, of the Faculty of Humanities, where Tim did a presentation of his work within space syntax. Tim Stonor is an architect and urban planner who has devoted his career to the analysis and design of human behavior patterns, the ways in which people move, interact, and transact in buildings and urban spaces. He is recognized internationally for his work in the design of spatial layouts and in particular the role of space in the generation of social, economic, and environmental value. Tim was appointed managing director of Space Syntax in 1995. He has led the company from its origin at the University College London to its position today as a practice operating globally. He is a director of the Academy of Urbanism, a visiting professor at the Bartlett School of Architecture, University College London, and a Harvard Loop Fellow. In 2018, he became deputy chair of the UK Design Council and was appointed to the advisory board of the Norman Foster Foundation. Well, quite an amazing resume. And I want to give the word to Tim, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon to everyone joining us in this session. It doesn't seem long ago that I was in Amsterdam for that talk, but hasn't the world changed a lot since then? And what I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes or so is talk about how I've seen some of that change from my perspective as an architect and an urban planner, and some thoughts about how I see the change continuing to happen to influence the way we live in cities. And I've put together a few slides around this subject of Together Apart. In particular, the issues of mobility, how we move, interaction, how we meet and greet, and what that means for spatial design post-COVID. I think post is the wrong word. We are with COVID for some time to come. When I began thinking about the change that was happening, I started to write a blog, and it seemed to me that while the coronavirus was a terrible thing, it could actually have some silver linings. It could help us rethink almost everything that we as architects design. Our home, the shops around us, the cafes we eat and drink at, the streets outside those cafes, and the offices that we're going to work in. We're still going to work in for a couple more days here in London, but soon we won't be able to be in. Our homes have become TV studios. We're now broadcasting through Zoom, and we have to think about the background. Is it a bookcase? Is it a representation of something about us? Shops have become places which, if we go into them, we don't touch, we just look. We then have to order and deliver, which makes us think that the design of space has to move along with the design of the financial mechanisms that allow those purchases to happen, and the delivery mechanisms that allow them to come back to us. Everything has to change. Cafes have moved outside where they're still open, and that means that the street has become an increasingly important place because it's the place where there is the most oxygen. very, very simply, it's the place of greatest ventilation and the place of greatest safety when we interact with other people. Also, how we move through the street has become, for many of us, no longer a choice to use public transport. That's been struck out of the equation largely, here in London especially. So what's left? Do we continue or to walk, to cycle? Do we jump into cars and start driving in ways that we had stopped doing? And finally, for offices, for the real estate industry, I think this is one of the biggest questions. Do we need them anymore? Or if we do we need them in the same way? I then continued to write about where is the best place to work from in the new normal? Is it the office or could it be at home? And the reason that I was interested in thinking about this was that it seems to me that the office is a place of multiple activities. And in quick conclusion, it seemed to me that although home could provide a desk, a screen, and a digital connection, it was not a good place for the kinds of creative and social activities that work depends on. And that's why I think we will always still need offices. We cannot yet replicate the instinctive, social, and productive environment of an office in our homes. And I don't think we ever will be able to. So an office design 101 for me is that we have to remember the primary function of an office is for serendipitous encounter, things that we hadn't planned to do. That might involve overhearing a conversation, which I do all the time now while I can still work in my studio. Something that I can help with, something that I can be inspired by, and introductions that I can make to my guests, meeting my colleagues or even other guests in my office. We can't do that at home. We can't yet do it on Zoom. So what do the design characteristics of the future office need to be? I think they need to be more like public spaces, gardens, where we see more benches and fewer desks, more open plan, much less cellular space. The office as a meeting place is the office of the future. Coming to the office to put your head down to work is not the thing to do in the future, because you can do that from home or you can do that from near home. Let's go outside, because the other thing I was writing about was, is physical distancing possible on city streets? There's been a lot of concern about how do we stay apart. Well, that was matched by, I know in the Netherlands, really good work about street width. But it seemed to me that's not enough just to talk about street width, because you could have a wide street in the middle of nowhere. And so if there's no one there, it could be as wide as or as narrow as anything. What you need to know about is the other side of the question, the other side of the equation, which is the demand to be in on a street. And that's the work that me and my company, Space Syntax, do as part of our design work. We predict the demand that any street will see from pedestrians. So we can identify here in that bright pink and then the red, those streets that are going to be most in demand because they are the most connected, the places where the greatest concentrations of land use attraction are located. And they are the ones that, if they're not wide enough, we need to remove the traffic from, give the space over to pedestrians and to cyclists. The grey streets and then the blue streets are the quietest ones, where we don't have to worry about width as much. So these kinds of maps, and I'll show you more of in the next few minutes, this kind of mapping approach is something that we found very helpful in the design process, to think about this issue of how can we be together apart in public space. And in doing so, we're continuing a tradition which has been around for some time. If we look at one of the last great public health emergencies in London, it was the outbreak in Soho of cholera. And John Snow mapped the outbreaks of cholera and used mapping to identify the cause of the problem, which was a water pump which had become infected. So we like to see ourselves working in that tradition. and mapping not only the physical architecture of buildings and streets, but the soft architecture of the human occupation of those streets. Because ultimately, that's what cities are about. They're about being places for people, those multiple activities that occur in streets, and especially the kinds of interactions and transactions between people that lead to the creation of new ideas, to innovation, and to the kind of social and technological progress that cities help us to make. So let's think about dealing with coronavirus, but let's also think about how we can make our cities even better. What would the city look like in 30 years from now? And I think at the heart of it is the street. We have to have cities built around streets. This may seem obvious in many contexts. For those of us who live in historic cities, it's obvious that the street is the place of social life. But it's not necessarily what we've been building in recent years. We've missed in many of our new developments the urban buzz of the street. We've separated our streets with barriers to keep people apart and to prioritize motorized vehicles. So it's one thing to say, let's defeat the coronavirus. But if we go back to these kinds of streets, we haven't done enough. We can and we need to do more, because at the large scale, those divided streets create divided cities. And the real estate industry has been complicit in this division, building on the left of this image, the city of fragmented enclaves, fragmented ghettos in many cases, which you have to access by car to go to the shopping center that is surrounded by a car park, to go into the gated community, which is surrounded by a wall. I think we need to go back to the city of integrated neighborhoods, the city of history, where the shops are on the main streets. The main streets are positive places, not negative places, where the city is slow, not fast. Those streets are places for walking and cycling, not driving. Now, we fortunately have some good experience of doing this, which began in the 1990s in London, where I had the benefit of working with Norman Foster and his team to redesign Trafalgar Square. We did that by closing some of the streets to traffic, but we also did it by designing these steps as places for people to move down and to sit on. Now, you may think these steps have been there forever. In fact, before they were there was a blank vertical wall separating the gallery at the back from the square at the front. The argument to demolish that historic wall was made using mapping, using analysis where we followed people. We literally watched them move around the outside of the square, and we demonstrated how few Londoners were using the center of the square. And this form of mapping is incredibly important in my experience in bringing people along on the decision journey. You as the architect may have a great idea, but if you can't convince people, it isn't going to happen. And mapping like this helps convince people to make those big decisions to create the steps. Modeling can also add another dimension to this. Pedestrian movement modeling must be in the toolkit of the architect and urban planner of the future, so that we can not only illustrate the people in our future plans, but also demonstrate in the way that traffic modelers have demonstrated how cars will move. We need to demonstrate how people will move, show how from the before to the after, the square can become full of people. And this really helped convince people to make that change. And before we move into perhaps a Q&A and a conversation, I just want to share a few more findings from more recent work, because the more we look at the issue of streets and spatial connectivity, the more we've understood about how they influence, for example, obesity. More people are fat, obese, overweight, and they live in disconnected places where they have to drive. More people are lonely when they live in disconnected places where they have to drive. Physical health and mental health are the consequence of bad urban planning. And because we can use mapping and modeling to identify this, we can create the evidence to sit alongside the medical evidence to persuade people to make change, to show whether people can have access to a good doctor or a good school. There is an enormous amount of data now available. And I think one of the jobs of an architect today should be to craft that data into a vision for change. I think it gives the design professions a new responsibility to work with data creatively to demonstrate how change should happen. One of the most important areas of future change in the UK that we have learned from the Netherlands about is the importance of speed, the importance of a 30-kilometer-an-hour maximum speed limit, which is common in the Netherlands, new to the UK. Recently, as a result of the coronavirus, people have been walking and cycling more, and the UK government has been investing more in making people slow down in their cars, making streets safer to walk and cycle in. In my hometown, we've used mapping as a community effort to create this map of the town onto which people have stuck a dot at a community event to demonstrate where they feel unsafe crossing the road. So you're looking at a photograph of a paper map. It's not GIS, it's not electronic, it's paper. And it became a compelling document to persuade the politicians to fund the change across the entire town to slow from 30 miles to 20 miles an hour. Huge difference that has now happened as a result of recent change. But you have to go further, because sometimes, even if the traffic slows down, there's no pedestrian crossing, or there's a bridge, a very ugly way of crossing the street. There's a demand to cross at surface level, but no crossing. So we're also now working to create the infrastructure for everyday human activity. And for me, this is urban architecture. It's not grand. It's not going to be on the front cover of an architecture journal yet. It's not star-architecture, but it's absolutely essential and hugely valuable in uplifting the quality of life and the value of land around it. Simple data, counting people crossing at that point, has helped demonstrate the need for change. We're working at the big scale of looking at entire cities, and this is what I just want to close on in the next couple of minutes. How do you use mapping and modeling to create streets where we can be together and sufficiently physically distanced to avoid coronavirus contact? Well, working in the city of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, we've been able to identify in the previous map the vehicle movement pattern, in this map the pedestrian movement pattern, and to see that they're entirely different. This is a city where you either drive or you walk, and you drive on different streets to the ones that you walk on, and it feels wrong. Good streets are where people drive and walk together, and so that's become our vision. A street where you can walk and drive slowly, walk at your leisure, combining public transport. So this sketch came out of the mapping analysis and has been developed into plans across a number of the often unplanned settlements or historic villages within the city to better connect them into the wider area, using real estate data, land value data, to provide options for how that can happen. And this is really the point I want to close on. Everything I've said so far raises land value. Behind what we do as a business, what every architect and urban planner should be thinking about is land value. Is this investable? Is it going to deliver a return on investment? Land value data is available if we decide to go look for it. And using land value data, we can demonstrate why certain plots of land are worth more than others. Spatial connectivity matters. Being accessible at a large scale to, say, a catchment of 10 kilometers The hot red streets here are the ones that longer distance journeys are more likely to travel along than the cold blue ones. But also at a pedestrian scale, a short scale catchment, the hot red streets here are more likely to be traveled along by people on foot. So if you've got a car and a foot journey, add on to them the public transport accessibility. When you've got all three, then land values are demonstrably higher. So we're using this evidence to argue for, in many ways, the traditional approach to city making: integrated mixed use, dense, slow speed, high volume streets for walking, for cycling, and for some slow speed driving. And using algorithms, we can make arguments. What really appeals to me is that these tools are design tools. We can very quickly sketch a proposal, take a plan, high movement in red, low movement in blue, high land value in red, low land value in blue. We can test our design proposal. It's not good enough. It's not connected enough. The land values, the movements are too low. Go back to the drawing board, try a different plan, run that through. It connects better. Everything's going to flow better. Then we can design it to be slow and design it to be high value. The modeling works at the large scale and at the small scale. And we've recently completed a plan for the city of Astana in Kazakhstan. We were given the responsibility of creating a plan for the entire city. Working with the city, we've done so. And I'll just run some images to show you finally how we've brought that together. Start with the negatives, the noise of the airport, the noise of the motorway. Identify flood risk. Identify the high quality soil and landscape that we want to preserve and avoid building on. Put those together to create a parametric modeling. Many architects are familiar with parametric modeling. This is a form of parametric urban modeling. It shows the areas where we can develop more in red, less in yellow. Then how do we connect the new into the old? That is the golden moment. There's no point getting it right if it doesn't connect into the big picture. Identify the gateways and then train an artificial intelligence algorithm to move from gateway to gateway and find a main street network that we can build into the primary street network of the city. Then move to the finer scale to identify the secondary street network. Try lots of options, use an optimizing algorithm to look at different lot size variations, run this through land value modeling and pedestrian movement and cycle modeling, and move through to the tertiary street network, right through to individual block sizes. Identify in the urban plan the street network, the plot network, leave the rest to other architects and planners. Don't take it too far because it's never going to happen the way you think at such an early stage. So in the end, we have a plan with the most commercial areas in red, the high density residential areas in orange, the low density residential in yellow, largely around where we're keeping the trees, and the ultimate urban plan connecting through public transport into the existing city, and illustrated finally from above, demonstrating the boulevards, the intersections where the buildings go taller, the connections between the new and the old city. I hope that's given us some useful thoughts about the importance of streets, of people, and of not only staying apart for the coronavirus, but remaining together in cities, because that is what we need for the continuation, I believe, of our cultures and of our species. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. It was, for me, definitely a very inspiring lecture. Good to hear some repetition of your previous lecture, but still very innovative again, also with a new reality since our last meeting. I just realized that I didn't introduce myself personally. I'm Leongo Juliana. I'm an associate at OZ, and I will also have a lecture on Thursday. But first, for today, I don't see any question. I have one question in the chat, which is from Marlies. And the question is, hello Tim, do you know whether there are cities that are already analyzing their urban structure for the use with post-COVID? So adapting cities that are already analyzing for the post-COVID period.
Yeah, I mean, I think every city is, and you know, please send more in the chat if I'm not answering properly. But I think every good city has had to say, how can we keep people safe? How can we keep business running? And I think that's the duality that seems to be challenging politicians. We saw a lot of very quick things happen in London. I can speak for London as an example, but I've seen also with friends elsewhere in the world how different cities have responded. Some have put in strong pedestrian measures for a few weeks and then taken them away and gone back to their largely car-based forms of transport. Other cities have stuck with the pedestrian measures because these things take time to bed in. In persuading people not to drive, that doesn't happen overnight. And you have to follow up the emergency measures with other benefits that actually make it safer and more comfortable to walk. So that means not just widening, but actually improving surfaces, improving lighting, improving signage and mapping.
Also, I've seen in the city of Bogota, Colombia, also that they have increased the cycling lane in the past months because of cycling being since you are outdoors, safe way to commute instead of using public transport. That is I know in the city of Bogota, in Medellin, that they have added cycling lanes, and also I've seen in Barcelona that they have added a more pedestrian area on the street. So reclaiming actually the street for the pedestrians. So you see movements which before were very difficult, but now possible. I was wondering, since space syntax uses a lot of computer analysis, what is your opinion on the capacity of an architect to observe with his own eyes, ears, and all his senses in relation to this computer-based analysis?
I think it's fundamental. I think not everyone has access to the computer technology that I've got access to, although it's part of our mission as a business to disseminate this technology. A lot of it is open source, and we're trying to push it out so that people can access it. However, if you can't, you can start by observing street life. And you know, as the Danish architect Jan Gehl says, we know more about the behavior of mountain gorillas than we do about our own behavior, because we've observed mountain gorillas. So I often say to architecture students, spend 10 minutes sitting on a street corner, watching the world go by and making notes in your notebook, rather than 10 hours in the library. You'll learn more in 10 minutes on a street than 10 hours in a library. And then I think it helps you understand how to use the technology. You know, our use of technology is led by what we've seen and the problems we've seen. I think one of the challenges of smart cities is that you have computer companies with amazing technology, but they don't know what the question is. They have the answer, but they don't know what the question is.
Yeah. There's a question from the chat from Ewout de Jager. How do you get the data you need, and what software do you use?
So a lot of the data we get through observation. That's clearly difficult now that cities are locked down in many cases, or not working in the way that they were. We started by observing, and we still observe because we want to know how places are different. We started with a pen and paper. Now we put cameras onto lampposts and film, or we use drones, or increasingly mobile phone devices. But also a lot of data is available from the public records, land use data, land value data, age, ability, education. There's a huge amount of data available. And finally, and most importantly, we draw the map of the city. We draw the street network of the city. And that data is also available within publicly available map systems. We use OpenStreetMap a lot because it's free and open.
Okay, thank you so much, Tim. I see our time is up. There's still many things to discuss. If people have questions, please forward them to us. You can do that also via our digital stand, the OZ stand in the Provada seminar. So find our stand and send us the data or the question. And there was also a question if this lecture will be available. If it's okay to you, Tim, we can share this and put this on our in our stand also. So we will edit it a little bit and then put it on. Have a proper beginning and ending to the film, so that other people can also see it. Rest me to say thank you very much for your participation in our stand, and it was really inspiring. I hope other people were also inspired, and it gave them some energy to confront this new reality that we deal with, and that it's basically we will have to take consideration of the reality we knew before, and this is a great opportunity to make changes that we didn't make before, and now we have the right perspective to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.